In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby, and when he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by, and let a little water be brought. And then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree, and let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried back to the tent to Sarah. "Quickly," he said, "get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." And then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. And then he brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. And one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself and thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, now will I have this pleasure?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh." And when the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what's right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he was promised." Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." Then the men turned away and went toward Sodom. But Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" And if there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of those 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not judge all of the earth, do right. And the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. And once again, he spoke to him. What if only 40 are found there? For the sake of 40, he said, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? I will not do it if I find 30 there, he answered. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? And he said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. And then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? And God answered, and he said, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home.
The Abracast: Occult, History, Conspiracy, and Violence.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Abracast. I'm John. You guys might know that I've been looking forward to getting to this story for a very long time. So I'm a little amped up. To get to it. In that cold open just set the scene. Obviously, that's from the book of Genesis. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth between Genesis and Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews. We're going to be bouncing back and forth between those. But hey, it's a new month, so let's first talk about what's up with the Fulgar Correspondentia this month. So this month, the Fulgar Correspondentia is a degree of the Abracast where you sign into the mailing list and you get a bunch of free stuff. You get access to a secret part of the website, and every month you get an email with a bunch of stuff on it. So this month we're getting, because of the Kama Sutra episode last week, I'm going to do I have done a bunch of Kama Sutra art to put into the Fulgar Correspondentia. I think there's 6 pieces going to make the cut to go in there. There's also, since we've been working on Genesis for since the beginning of this podcast, I felt like a need to kind of summarize it where we are up to this point. So I did an infographic of the timeline of Genesis, very basic, up to this point. So if you're wondering where this fits into everything else on the featured topic link, which can be found at abracast.com, that infographic will probably pretty much lay it out for you. Also, I don't know if I want to blow the detail. Okay, so here's what's going on. Also, we're wrapping up the Goetia episodes, our Solomon episodes. We're wrapping up very soon. So there's still the Goetia worksheet that's on there. So you want to grab that if you're interested in the Goetia, and then that's going to tie into something we're going to do for Halloween. I filled out a Goetia worksheet, so I guess I just spoiled it. But I'm going to go ahead and scan in my Goetic worksheet that I did for the Halloween episode on there. So if you kind of want to get a head start on, or a little bit of an insight on what the Halloween episode is going to be, you can check it out there. Also, I'm trying to get through this real fast because I know we all just want to talk about the fucking crushing defeat of Sodom and Gomorrah. I introduced a new degree to the degrees of the Abercast. So we have a new third degree. It's called the degree of the Red Archive. So what's going to be happening is incrementally, we're going to be archiving old episodes. And so if you want to catch those old episodes, I made it as cheap and as easy as possible. So all the Red Archive episodes are available for $1 a month on Patreon and Subscribestar. So if you notice, you're going back through the library or whatever, you're going back through the list of shows and they're decreasing. They're going to be rapidly decreasing incrementally, and they're all going to be found on Patreon or Subscribestar for that $1 tier. Again, that's called the degree of the Red Archive. The graphic for it is pretty titties, everybody. One other thing about the degrees, I added a new perk to the Vessel of the Art degree, and that perk is going to be, that's the $10 a month tier. So that perk is going to be, if you are interested, I'm going to make myself available for one Skype call a month for you guys. We can talk about anything you want. We can shoot the shit about whatever you want. It doesn't have to be about the occult. We can talk about fucking music, etch-a-sketches, how to make the best mixtape. I mean, I don't know, whatever you guys want to talk about. Wrestling, you want to talk about wrestling? Whatever you guys want to talk about, make myself available for one Skype call a month. So, I think that's pretty interesting. I'm trying to find ways to connect, and I think that might be a good one. All right, so let's get into it. I don't think I wasted too much time with all that stuff. We got a great episode planned. So if you're playing along at home, I would like you to summon your Vessel of the Art. And I'd like you to mix up your favorite weapon of mass distraction. And mine happens to be a Jin Jihad, as you know. That seems to be my go-to 99.9% of the time. And I'd like you to join me in a toast, or raise your Vessel of the Art up to the sky, and thank my Patreon and Subscribestar folks for supporting it. Without those folks, the show would not be what it is. So thank you guys. Thank everybody. I appreciate it. And here you go. Down the hatch. The cities of sin. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah and of the three other cities of the plain were sinful and godless. So the first time that we ran into Sodom and Gomorrah was in the World War Zero episode, which is what I call the War of the Nine Kings, or the War of the I think it's called the War of the Veil, or the War of the Plains, or the War of the Veil of Shinar. Anyhow, they were two of the 9 kingdoms that were involved in this World War Zero. And that's also where we were introduced a lot. And Abram at the time. Back to it. In their country, there was an extensive vale where they foregathered annually, and their wives and their children and all belonged to them, to celebrate the feast lasting several days and consisting of the most revolting orgies. If a stranger merchant passed through their territory, he was besieged by them all, big and little alike, and robbed of whatever he possessed. Each one appropriated a bagatelle until the traveler was stripped bare. If the victim ventured remonstrate with one another, he would show him that he had taken a mere trifle not worth talking about. In the end was that they hounded him from the city. So it sounds like these places are, A, they know how to party, and B, they're fucking dangerous places for travelers. Once upon a time, it happened that a man journeying from Elam arrived in Sodom towards the evening, and no one could be found to grant him shelter for the night. Finally, a sly fox named Hedor invited him cordially to follow him to his house. The sodomite had been attracted by a rarely magnificent carpet strapped to the stranger's ass by means of a rope. Remember? They know how to fucking party. We meant to secure it for himself. The friendly persuasion of Hedor introduced the stranger to remain with him 2 days, although he had expected to stay only overnight. And when the time came for him to continue on his journey, he asked his host for the carpet and the rope, and Hedor says, "Thou hast dreamed a dream." And this is the interpretation of thy dream. The rope signifies thou wilt have a long life as long as this rope. And the varicolored carpet indicates that thou wilt own an orchard wherein thou wilt plant all sorts of fruit trees. The stranger insisted that his carpet was a reality and not a dream fancy, and he continued to demand its return. Not only did Hedor deny having taken anything from his guest, he even insisted upon pay for having interpreted his dream from him. His usual price for such a service, he said, was 4 silver pieces. But in view of the fact that he was his guest, he would do him a favor, content himself with only 3 pieces of silver. After much wrangling, they put their case before one of the judges of Sodom, Shrek by name. And he said to the plaintiff, "Hedor is known in the city as a trustworthy interpreter of dreams, and what he tells thee is true." The stranger declared himself not satisfied with this verdict and continued to urge his side of the case, and Shrek drove both plaintiff and defendant from the courtroom. Seeing this, the inhabitants gathered together and chased the stranger away from the city, and lamenting the loss of his carpet, he had to pursue his way. As Sodom had a judge worthy of itself, also had the other cities, Shankar in Gomorrah, Zebnac in Admah, and Manon in Zeboim. Eliezer, the bondman of Abraham, made slight changes to the names of these judges in accordance with the nature of what they did. The first he called Shakara, liar. The second, Shakruna, the arch deceiver, and the third, Kazban, a falsifier, and the fourth, Mazaldin, perverter of judgment. At the suggestion of these judges, the cities set up beds in their commons. When strangers arrived, 3 men seized him by his head and 3 by his feet, and they forced him upon one of the beds. This is like an episode of Oz. Remember Oz? Or the Shawshank Redemption or something. If American History X. If he was too short to fit into it exactly, his 6 attendants pulled and wrenched his limbs until he filled it out. And if he was too long for it, they tried to jam him in with all their combined strength until the victim was on the verge of death. Hit outcries were met with the words, "Thus will be done to any man who comes into our land." And after a while, travelers avoided these cities. But if some poor devil was betrayed occasionally into entering them, they would give him gold and silver, but never any bread, so that he was bound to die of starvation. And once he was dead, the residents of the city came to look back at the marked gold and silver which he had given him, and they would quarrel about the distribution of his clothes, for they would bury him naked. Once, Eliezer, the bondman of Abraham, was sent to Sodom at the bidding of Sarah to inquire after the welfare of Lot. So Lot was Abraham's nephew. So he was Sarah's nephew as well. He happened to enter the city at the moment when the people were robbing a stranger of his garments. Eliezer espoused to cause of the poor wretch, and the Sodomites turned against him, and one threw a stone at his forehead and caused a considerable loss of blood. Instantly the assailant, seeing the blood gush forth, demanded payment for having to perform the operation of cupping. Eliezer refused to pay for the infliction of a wound upon him, and he was haled before the judge, Shakara. The decision went against him, for the law of the land gave the assailant the right to demand payment. Eliezer quickly picked up a stone and threw it at the judge's forehead. And when he saw the blood was flowing profusely, he said to the judge, "Pay my debt to the man and give me the balance." So Eliezer does not fuck around. And also, like, where is this place? Is this Chicago? Or is this Baltimore? The cause of their cruelty was the exceeding great wealth. Their soil was gold, and their miserliness and their greed for more and more gold. They wanted to prevent the strangers from enjoying aught of their riches. Accordingly, they flooded the highways with streams of water so that the roads to their cities were obliterated, and none could find the way thither. There was a heartless towards beasts and towards men. They begrudged the birds what they ate and therefore extirpated them. They behaved impiously towards one another too, not shrinking back from murder to gain possessions of more gold. And they observed that a man owned great riches, two of them would conspire against him. And they would beguile him to the vicinity of the ruins, and while the one kept him on the spot in pleasant converse, the other would undermine the wall nearby which he stood until suddenly crashed down upon him and killed him. Then the two plotters would divide his wealth between them. Death by combat engineer right there is what you just saw. They sapped the strength of the wall, and the fucking wall crushed them. Another method of enriching themselves with the property of others was in vogue among them. They were android thieves. When they made up their mind to commit theft, they would first ask their victim to take care of a sum of money for them, which smeared with strong scented oil before handing it over to him. The following night, they would break into his house and rob him of his secret treasures, led to the place of concealment by the smell of the oil. Their laws were calculated to do injury to the poor. The richer man, the more he was favored before the law. The owner of 2 oxen was obliged to render one day his shepherd's service, but if he had but 1 ox, he would have to give 2 days' service. a poor orphan who was thus forced to tend the flocks a longer time than those who were blessed with large herds, killed all the cattle entrusted to him in order to take revenge upon his oppressors. And when he insisted, when the skins were assigned, that the owners of the 2 head of cattle should have but 1 skin, and the owner of 1 head should receive 2 skins, in correspondence to the method pursued by assigning the work. For the use of the ferry, a traveler had to pay 4 zuzes, but if he waded through the water, he had to pay 8 zuz. The cruelty of the Sodomites went still further. Lot had a daughter, Paltit, so named because she had been born to him shortly after he escaped captivity through the help of Abram. That captivity was all covered in the World War Z episode. It was a long fucking time ago. Paltit lived in Sodom, where she had married once a beggar came to town, and the court issued a proclamation that none shall give him anything to eat, in order that he might die of starvation. But Paltit had pity upon the unfortunate wretch, and every day she went to the well to draw water. She supplied him with a piece of bread, which she hid in her water pitcher. The inhabitants of the 2 sinful cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, could not understand why the beggar did not perish. And they suspected that someone was giving him food in secret. 3 men concealed themselves near the beggar and caught Paltit in the act of giving him something to eat. He had to pay for her humanity with his death, and she was burnt upon a pyre. The people of Adama were no better than those of Sodom, and once a stranger came to Adama, intending to stay overnight, and continued his journey the next morning, the daughter of a rich man met the stranger and gave him water to drink and bread to eat at his request. When the people of Adama had heard of this infraction of the law of the land, they seized the girl, who arraigned her before the judge, who condemned her to death. The people smeared her with honey from top to toe and exposed her where bees would be attracted to her, and the insects stung her to death. The callous people paid no heed to her heartrending cries, and then it was this God resolved upon the destruction of these sinners.
On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode,
hear the names of white men and others who, it was said, had also met or seen these creatures. She went after these persons too and found out that in due course that it was so, and they in turn had not been saying anything for fear of ridicule. I withhold their names too, as I do not have permission of any to publish them. Said human kids on reaching the age of reason turned out not to want to talk about this abomination, while their parents were most definitely did not and do not want to talk about it. Nonetheless, they have talked a bit, and I pass it on to you for what it is worth. We've made 5 investigation trips and have, for evidence, a fingerprint lifted off a house window, including a plaster cast of a footprint, personal taped accounts of the creature, plus many interviews. This includes photographs. He is 7 feet tall, 400 pounds. That's a big motherfucker. Can move at tremendous speeds, jump tremendous distances. No news items concerning this being have been printed in the Portland papers. He displays extreme cunning, walks and runs. Whoa, this is personal. He displays extreme cunning. He walks and runs erect. Appears frustrated. Acts as if he would like to communicate. He makes extremely high-pitched sounds. But if you want to stay till afterwards, I'll tell you I've never talked about this. I told my wife about it last night at a campfire while I was deciding what I was going to do with this episode. So I've never told any very literally a fraction, like maybe 3 other human beings, this story. But I'll tell you my fucking Bigfoot story if you hang on after this.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
There are beautiful boys there, without question.
I wish I were as rich as he is. He buys slaves at any price.
Get up, Lot. Get up. Greetings, Lot, nephew of Abram.
I know that God has sent you. Come into the house of your servant, please. You can stay in for the night. Then you can wash your feet, and tomorrow morning at dawn, you can continue your journey.
No, thank you, kind sir. We will spend the night in the square.
It would be a great dishonor for me if I allowed it. I cannot let you sleep in the open like sheep. You must sleep in the enclosure.
Who are these 2 following Lot?
They are his guests, or so he says. Lot is a relative of Abram the Chaldean. Do you remember when he fought with the king of our city?
That was a very long time ago, but I haven't forgotten the tales that I've been told.
Where are the men that have come to thee tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them.
No, these men are my guests, and hospitality is sacred for me and my family. We are living among wicked people. They could have killed us all.
The Lord has already placed his judgment upon this city.
The power of the Almighty God has saved us. Jehovah, save us from his wrath.
Jehovah, Jehovah, we beg your mercy.
Jehovah rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven, and overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew upon the ground.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
The destruction of the sinful cities. The angels left Abraham at noontime. They reached Sodom at the approach of evening. And as a rule, angels proclaim their errand with the swiftness of lightning. But these were angels of mercy, and they hesitated to execute their work of destruction, ever hoping that the evil would be turned aside from Sodom. With the nightfall, the fate of Sodom was sealed irrevocably, and the angels arrived there. Bred in the house of Abraham, Lot had learnt from him the beautiful custom of extending hospitality. And when he saw the angels before him in human form, thinking they were wayfarers, he bade them to turn aside and tarry all night in his house. But as the entertainment of strangers was forbidden in Sodom on penalty of death, he dared invite them only under the cover of darkness of night. And even when he had to use every manner of precaution, bidding the angels to follow him by devious ways, the angels who accepted Abraham's hospitality without delay first refused to comply with Lot's request. For it is a rule of good breeding to show reluctance when an ordinary man invites one, but to accept the invitation of a great man at once. Lot, however, was insistent, and he carried them into his house by main force, a home he had to overcome the opposition of his wife, for he said, "If the inhabitants of Sodom hear of this, they will slay thee." And Lot divided his dwelling in two parts, one for himself and his guests, and the other for his wife, so that if aught happened, his wife would be spared. Nevertheless, it was she who betrayed him. She went to a neighbor and borrowed some salt. And to the question whether she could not have supplied herself with salt during the daylight hours, she replied, "We had enough salt until some guests came to us. For them, we need more." In this way, the presence of strangers was brooded abroad the city. In this way, the presence of strangers was brooded abroad the city. In the beginning, the angels were inclined to hearken to the petition of Lot in behalf of the sinners. But when all the people of the city, big and little, crowded around the house of Lot with the purpose of committing a monstrous crime, the angels warded off his prayers, saying, "Hitherto thou couldst intercede for them, but now no longer." It was not the first time that the inhabitants of Sodom wanted to perpetrate a crime of this sort. They had made a law some time before that all strangers were to be treated in this horrible way. Lot was appointed chief judge on the very day of the angels' coming, tried to introduce the people to desist from their purpose, saying to them, "My brethren, the generation of the deluge is extirpated in consequence of such sin as you desire to commit, and you would revert to them." But they replied back, "And though Abraham himself came hither, we should have no consideration for him. Is it possible thou wouldst set aside the law which is thy predecessors administrated? Even Lot's moral sense was no better than it should have been. It is the duty of a man to venture his life for the honor of his wife and his daughters, but Lot was ready to sacrifice the honor of his daughters, wherefore he was punished severely later on. Put a pin in that. Put a little asterisk next to that in your brain. The angels told Lot who they were and what the mission had brought to them to Sodom, and they charged him to flee from the city with his wife and his 4 daughters, 2 of them married and 2 betrothed. And Lot communicated their bidding to his sons-in-laws. And they mocked him and said, "O thou fool, violins, cymbals, and flutes resound in this city, and thou sayest Sodom will be destroyed." Such scoffing but hastened the execution of the doom of Sodom. The angel Michael laid hold upon the hand of Lot and his wife and his daughters, and while his little finger, the angel Gabriel, touched the rock whereupon the sinful cities were built and overturned them. And at the same time, the rain was streaming down upon the 2 cities. It was changed into brimstone. So this Legends of the Jews is kind of like dancing around the issue, right? Like they went into this whole rigmarole at the very beginning, talking about how these people of the city would roll travelers, and the legal system of the city was designed to tell them to fuck off. Well, that's interesting. It's certainly interesting, but I want to go to the scripture here for a minute. I got my old Red Letter International here. And I want to actually just go back to actual Genesis and talk about, well, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to read it. I want to go back to Genesis, and I actually want to read, this. The scripture is not talking about in hospitality. It's not talking about the willingness to rob and thieve. So I don't want to put too much of a spin. I don't want to put too much editorializing in here. So I'm just going to read it straight up. This is Genesis 19. I don't know. We'll start at 9. We'll start at 19. We'll start at 19:1. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. And when he saw them, he got up to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning." "No," they answered, "we will spend the night in the square." But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him, and they entered his house and he prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast. And they ate, and before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men you came to you tonight? Bring them out with us so we can have sex with them." And Lot went outside to meet them, and he shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you could do what you like to them, but don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." "Get out of our way," they replied to him. And they said, "This fellow came here as an alien, and now he wants to play the judge. will treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot to move forward, to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. So the angels pulled Lot out of this mob's way and shut the door. Then, this is so heavy metal. Then the angels, struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. The two men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this fucking place." And the outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws who were pledged to marry his daughters. And he said, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy this city." And his son-in-laws thought he was joking. With the coming dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, and you will be swept away when the city is punished." And when he hesitated, the men grasped his hands and the hands of his wife and of his two daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. And soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, and don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I cannot flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small, and let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." And he said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." But that is why the town is called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land, and the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So no message, no editorializing. I just wanted to point out the difference. Back to the legend of the Jews. When the angels had brought forth Lot and his family and set them without the city, he bade them to run for their lives and not look behind, lest they behold the Shekinah, which had descended to work the destruction of the cities. The wife of Lot could not control herself. Her mother love made her look behind to see if her married daughters were following. She beheld the Shekinah, and she became a pillar of salt. Remember, she went to beg for salt from the neighbors to get the story out. Fake news. Fake news. This pillar exists unto this day. The cattle lick at it all day long. And in the evening, it seems to have disappeared. But when the morning comes, it stands here as large as before. The Savior angel had urged Lot himself to take refuge with Abraham, but he refused and said, "As long as I dwelt apart from Abraham, God compared my deeds with the deeds of my fellow citizens, and among them I appeared as a righteous man. If I should return to Abraham, God will see his good deeds outweigh mine by far. And the angel then granted his plea that Zohar be left undestroyed. And the city had been found a year later than the other 4 and was only 51 years old. And therefore the measure of its sins was not so full as the measure of the sins of neighboring cities. The destruction of the cities of the plain took place at dawn on the 16th day of Nisan, for the reason that there were moon and sun worshippers among its inhabitants. And God said, if I destroy them by day, the moon worshippers will say, were the moon here, she would have proved herself our savior. And if I destroy them by night, the sun worshippers will say, were the sun here, this would prove himself our savior. And I will therefore let their chastisement overtake them on the 16th day of Nisan, at an hour at which the moon and the sun are both in the skies. The sinful inhabitants of the city of the plains not only lost their lives in this world, but also share in the future world. As for the cities themselves, however, they will be restored to in the messianic times. The destruction of Sodom happened at the time at which Abraham was performing his morning devotions, and for his sake it was established as a proper hour for the morning prayer unto all times. And he turned his eye toward Sodom and beheld the rising smoke, and he prayed for the deliverance of Lot, and God granted his petition. The 4th time that Lot became deeply indebted to Abraham. Abraham had taken with him into Palestine, and he made him rich in flocks and herds and tents, and he rescued him from captivity, and by his prayer he saved him from the destruction of Sodom. Again, I would like you to recall World War Zero, the World War Zero episode. It's actually called World War Zero and Adam's Magic Underpants. I should have named it Wonderpants. The Ammonites and the Moabites, instead of showing the gratitude of the Israelites, the prosperity of Abraham, committed 4 acts of hostility against him. They sought to compass the destruction of Israel by means of Balaam's curse. They waged open war against him until the time of Japheth, and also the time of Jehoshaphat. And finally, they manifested their hatred against Israel and the destruction of the temple. Hence it was that God appointed 4 prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Zephaniah, to proclaim punishment unto the descendants of Lot. And 4 times their sins is recorded in Holy Writ. Though Lot owed his deliverance to the petition of Abraham, yet it was the same time his reward for not having betrayed Abraham in Egypt, when he pretended to be the brother of Sarah. But a greater reward still awaits him. The Messiah will be a descendant of his. For the Moabitess Ruth is the great-grandmother of David, and the Ammonitess Naamah is the mother of Rehoboam, and the Messiah is of the line of these 2 kings. So this is interesting because it speaks to something I talked about a little bit on the show before. We're not nearly into the New Testament, but when Jesus was crucified and they called him the King of the Jews, they nailed that thing on the cross and they called him the King of the Jews. And when they put the crown of thorns on his head, they called him the King of the Jews. It's because he was literally the king of the Jews. Because at the time, Jewish lineage, like the hereditary lineage or whatever, seems to have come from the feminine side. So here it's talking about Sarah, and Ruth was the great-grandmother of David, and Nehemiah was the mother of Rehoboam, and the Messiah was in his line of these two kings. So I always thought that that was fascinating. But then at the same time, I'm always like, well, why is the father having to always bless, without fail, this early in Genesis, they're always blessing the wrong son. All right. So I have a couple of things to say, and I don't really have anything prepared, but there's this lineage, like there's this idea that the scriptures, both old and new, are this thing about like being anti-urban or anti-civilization. Cain was the first one to create a city, and he's cast always as a bad guy. And then we get to, whatever was going on with the Genesis 6 stories. There must have had to be like a collection of folks, for these angels to swoop down and to take these earth chicks. It's always about the earth chicks. And then there's the Tower of Babel, where everyone is building this, tower that is like a city within a city. Instead of a sprawl, it's reaching up towards the heaven, and it's bad. And then here we have just plain out God's destroying these cities. It's interesting. It actually reaches all the way into the New Testament, this anti-city thing where Jesus doesn't want to go in. He spends a lot of time being out. And then when he goes in, the shit goes down. So there's that to say. And then way back when I did when I was wrapping up the flood stories, and then we ran into this thing with Ham and Noah, and this whatever weird thing he did in the tent when Noah didn't have his pants on. I made reference to how that ties into this story. And here's where we're going to get, a lot of people might not be like, what are you talking about? And the Legend of the Jews story got around this, the way they explain it was that because Lot offered his daughters to this mob to be like gangbanged, I guess, this is the price he pays. But here's kind of like the epilogue to that whole story. Like, this is Genesis 19:30 to 36. Lot and his daughters. Lot and his two daughters left Zohar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zohar. When his two daughters lived in a cave, one day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. And let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our own father." That night, they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. And he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. And the next day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Last night I slept with my father, and let's get him to drink wine again tonight. And you go in and you sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father." So they got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. And the older daughter had a son, and his name was Moab, and he was the father of the Moabites of today. And the younger daughter had a son, and she named him Ben-Ammi, and he is the father of the Ammonites of today. So I think there's some interesting parallels there, and maybe it's the topic of a whole other episode. Of the parallels, I mean, we got wine, we got, in Noah's case, implied incest. I mean, in Lot's case, I mean, he did that shit. That was like that's some Pornhub shit right there. All right. I'm John. This is the Abercast. Hey, remember what I said earlier about the Fulgur Correspondentia Kama Sutra art, the Genesis timeline, the Goetia worksheet, and also a filled out Goetia worksheet, kind of giving hints about what the Halloween episode is going to be about this year. There's a new degree. It's called the Degree of the Red Archive. It's $1 on Subscribestar and Patreon. You get all the archived old shows. And there's a new perk for the Fellowcraft. There's a new perk for the Vessel of the Art tier. And that's the $10 tier. And what you get is you get a monthly Skype call by me, from me, with me. And we'll talk about whatever bullshit you want to talk about. I'm John. This is the Abercast. Thank you. Peace out.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode,
hear the names of white men and others who, it was said, had also met or seen these creatures. She went after these persons too and found out that in due course that it was so, and they in turn had not been saying anything for fear of ridicule. I withhold their names too, as I do not have permission of any to publish them. Said human kids on reaching the age of reason turned out not to want to talk about this abomination, while their parents were most definitely did not and do not want to talk about it. Nonetheless, they have talked a bit, and I pass it on to you for what it is worth. We've made 5 investigation trips and have, for evidence, a fingerprint lifted off a house window, including a plaster cast of a footprint, personal taped accounts of the creature, plus many interviews. This includes photographs. He is 7 feet tall, 400 pounds. That's a big motherfucker. Can move at tremendous speeds, jump tremendous distances. No news items concerning this being have been printed in the Portland papers. He displays extreme cunning, walks and runs. Whoa, this is personal. He displays extreme cunning. He walks and runs erect. Appears frustrated. Acts as if he would like to communicate. He makes extremely high-pitched sounds. But if you want to stay till afterwards, I'll tell you I've never talked about this. I told my wife about it last night at a campfire while I was deciding what I was going to do with this episode. So I've never told any very literally a fraction, like maybe 3 other human beings, this story. But I'll tell you my fucking Bigfoot story if you hang on after this.